You embarrass me. So I gave her husband's firm 30 days to find a new home. My name is Julia. I am 74 years old, and 3 months ago, my own daughter looked me in the eye at her husband's law firm's anniversary party and said, "Mom, you embarrass me." She said it in front of 40 guests, in front of the partners, in front of the woman who would soon become her mother-in-law's replacement in her heart. What none of them knew, what my daughter herself had forgotten, is that I own the building their entire firm operates out of. Every desk, every conference room, every gold-lettered sign with their names on it sits on land that has my name on the deed, not theirs. So when she humiliated me in front of everyone she wanted to impress, I didn't cry and I didn't argue. I went home, I made a pot of tea, and I called my lawyer. 30 days later, that firm didn't have a home anymore. If you want to know how a 74-year-old grandmother brought down a law firm without raising her voice once, stay with me, because this story is not finished. It is only getting started. Before I go on, I want to ask you for something small. If this story is worth your time, tap that like button because it tells me you're still here with me. Subscribe if you haven't already because I have more stories like this one, stories about growing older and refusing to shrink. And in the comments, tell me where in the world you're watching this from tonight. I read every single one, and it warms this old heart of mine to know how far these words travel. Now let me take you back to where it all began. I was born in 1952, in a small house with a coal stove and a mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us fed. I never had much growing up, so when I built something of my own later in life, I understood the value of it in a way people who inherit things never quite do. My husband, Robert, and I married when I was 22. We didn't have money when we started out. We had a rented apartment above a hardware store and a plan. Robert worked construction, and I kept the books for 3 different small businesses in town, teaching myself accounting from library books because we couldn't afford for me to go back to school. By the time I was 30, we had saved enough for our first piece of property, a rundown building downtown that nobody wanted because the roof leaked and the wiring was from another century. We fixed it up ourselves nights and weekends and rented it out to a print shop. That was the beginning. Over the next 20 years, Robert and I built a small portfolio of commercial buildings in this city. Nothing flashy. No skyscrapers. Just solid brick buildings with good bones, rented to people who needed a place to run their business. We were careful. We were patient. And by the time Robert passed 12 years ago, we owned 6 buildings outright, free and clear, no debt on any of them. One of those buildings is a 4-story office building downtown, the kind with tall windows and old crown molding that modern buildings don't bother with anymore. 15 years ago, a small law firm rented 2 floors of it. Over the years, that firm grew and grew and grew until they occupied the entire building. The name on the lease and on the gold plaque by the front door was Sterling V. Cole. And the managing partner who signed that lease and grew that firm into something respectable in this city was my daughter's husband, a man named Bradley. My daughter, Catherine, married Bradley when she was 26. I liked him well enough at the beginning. He was ambitious, sharp-tongued, and he clearly adored my daughter, which mattered more to me than anything else. I helped them when they were starting out the way any mother would. When Bradley needed office space for the small practice he was building with 2 partners, I offered him a good rate in my building, lower than market value, because he was family and because I believed in what he was trying to build. I never once mentioned that discount to Catherine or to him again after that first year. I didn't need thanks. I needed to see my daughter's family thrive. And thrive they did. Sterling V. Cole became one of the more respected firms in the city. Bradley became the public face of it, giving quotes to the local paper, sitting on charity boards, shaking hands at galas. Catherine transformed alongside him. The daughter I raised in a modest house with hand-me-down furniture became a woman who talked about wine pairings and interior designers, and which country club had the better tennis program. I watched this transformation with a strange mixture of pride and quiet grief. The way you feel when a plant you nurtured grows into a shape you didn't quite expect. For years, the distance between us grew slowly, the way distance always does. Not with a single dramatic break, but with 1,000 small absences. Missed Sunday dinners. Phone calls that got shorter. Birthdays remembered with a gift card instead of a visit. I told myself this was simply what happens when children build their own lives. I told myself I shouldn't take it personally. I told myself a lot of things to make the loneliness easier to carry. The firm's 15th anniversary party was held in a ballroom downtown. the kind with chandeliers and a string quartet playing softly in the corner while waiters circled with trays of champagne. Catherine invited me herself, which surprised me, and I made the mistake of believing it meant something. I bought a new dress. I had my hair done. I arrived early because I was nervous and excited in equal measure, feeling, for the first time in a long while, like I might actually belong somewhere in my daughter's new world. I want you to understand something about me before I tell you what happened next. I am not a woman who demands attention. I don't need to be the center of anything. I have spent my whole life comfortable on the edges of rooms, content to watch and support rather than perform. So when I say that what happened at that party humiliated me, I need you to understand that it took something truly cruel to make a woman like me feel that way, because I do not humiliate easily. I was standing near the dessert table, talking quietly with an older gentleman who turned out to be a retired judge, when I overheard my daughter's voice rising above the music. She was speaking to a cluster of women I recognized as the wives of the firm's partners, all of them dressed in the kind of clothing that costs more than I used to earn in a month. Catherine was laughing at something, and then she said my name, and I turned, thinking she wanted to introduce me. Instead, she said, loud enough for the group around her and several people beyond it to hear clearly, "Oh, that's just my mother." She insisted on coming tonight even though I told her it was formal. "Mom, you embarrass me. Could you at least try to blend in?" The women around her laughed. Not cruelly exactly, the kind of laugh people give when they don't know what else to do with an awkward moment, when they're following a leader rather than making a choice of their own. But Catherine wasn't laughing along with them. She meant it. I could see it in her face, in the flush of embarrassment she was trying to cover with humor, in the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I looked down at my dress, the one I had chosen so carefully that morning, turning in front of the mirror, feeling for a moment young again. It was simple. It was modest. It was, by every reasonable standard, entirely appropriate for the evening. There was nothing wrong with how I looked. What Catherine was ashamed of wasn't my dress. It was me. My age. My plainness. The fact that I still spoke like the woman who raised her in a small house with a coal stove memory buried somewhere in my accent, instead of the polished country club version of a mother she apparently wished she had instead. I did not cry in that ballroom. I want you to know that. I have cried plenty of times in my life, but I did not give my daughter or her guests the satisfaction of watching me fall apart in front of them. I smiled the way I had smiled through harder things than this, and I told the retired judge it was lovely meeting him, and I found my coat, and I left quietly through a side door so that no one would see me go. I drove home in silence. No radio. Just my hands on the wheel and my daughter's voice repeating itself in my head. "You embarrass me. Try to blend in." I thought about all the years I had quietly subsidized Bradley's rent so his firm could grow. I thought about the college tuition Robert and I had paid without ever mentioning it at family gatherings, because we didn't want Catherine to feel indebted to us. I thought about every Christmas I had spent alone in recent years while Catherine spent them at Bradley's parents' house because it was, in her words, just easier. And somewhere on that quiet drive home, something in me shifted. Not into anger exactly, or not only anger. Into clarity. I realized that I had spent years being generous with people who had stopped seeing that generosity as a gift and started treating it as an inconvenience they tolerated. I realized that my daughter had built a life on a foundation partly made of my quiet sacrifices, and she had grown so comfortable standing on that foundation that she had forgotten it was there at all. I did not act that night. I want to be clear about that because I think revenge done in anger is usually revenge done badly. I went home, I took off that beautiful dress, I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat in my kitchen for a long time thinking. I thought about what I actually wanted. Not to hurt Catherine. Despite everything, she is still my daughter, and some part of a mother never stops wanting her child's happiness, even when that child has been cruel. What I wanted was for her to understand, clearly and permanently, that the comfortable life she had built with Bradley existed because of choices I had made, and that those choices could be unmade. The next morning I called my lawyer, a sharp, careful woman named Aubrey who had handled all of Robert's and my property matters for over a decade. I told her what had happened, not with drama, just with the facts, the way I would report anything else. And then I asked her a simple question. What would it take legally to end the lease with Sterling v. Cole and reclaim the building? Aubrey pulled the lease. It turned out that 15 years earlier, in the early excitement of helping Bradley get his practice off the ground, The lease had been written with a clause that most landlords never include, a clause that allowed either party to terminate with 30 days written notice, provided in writing, no cause required. Robert and I had included it, honestly, because at the time we wanted the flexibility to sell the building someday without being locked into a long-term tenant if the right offer came along. Neither Bradley nor his partners had ever renegotiated that clause over the years, likely because they never imagined I would use it against them. Why would I? I had given them a discount for 15 years. I had never once been difficult. I had been, in every sense, the kind of quiet, generous landlord that tenants dream of. I asked Aubrey to draft the termination notice. I did not do this impulsively, and I did not do it out of pure spite, though I won't pretend spite played no part in it. I did it because I finally understood something about myself that I had spent years avoiding. That being generous does not mean being invisible, and that dignity once demanded of you by people who claim to love you is worth protecting even when the protecting costs something. The notice went out on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to the firm's main office, addressed to all three partners, with a copy sent to Bradley's personal email as a courtesy, though the lease didn't require it. It stated plainly, in Aubrey's careful legal language, that per the terms of their existing lease agreement, the landlord, meaning me, was exercising the right to terminate the lease with 30 days' notice, effective immediately, requiring the premises to be vacated by the deadline specified. I did not call Catherine to warn her. I did not explain myself to Bradley. I let the letter speak for itself, the way Catherine's words at that party had spoken for themselves without any warning to me. The phone calls started that same afternoon. First from Bradley, whose voicemail was clipped and professional, asking me to call him back to discuss what must be some kind of misunderstanding. Then from Catherine an hour later, her voice tight with a panic I hadn't heard from her in years, demanding to know what I thought I was doing, telling me I was being dramatic, telling me this would humiliate the entire firm. I let her use that word. Humiliate. I let it sit between us on the phone line for a moment before I responded. Catherine, I said, calm as I have ever been in my life, you humiliated me in front of 40 people at that party. You told me I embarrass you. You told me to blend in, as though I were something to be ashamed of rather than the mother who raised you and the woman who has been quietly paying for parts of your comfortable life for 15 years without ever asking for a thank you. I am not doing this to punish you. I am doing this because I finally remembered that I deserve to be treated with respect, and I am no longer willing to subsidize people who don't extend me that respect. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said the thing people say when they've been caught doing something they know was wrong, but aren't ready to fully admit to. It's not that simple, Mom. No, I agreed. It never is. But the 30 days are not negotiable. Bradley has excellent lawyers of his own. I'm sure they'll help him find a new building. I hung up before she could say anything else. The next 30 days were, by all accounts from people who still speak to me in this city, chaos for Sterling v. Cole. Commercial real estate does not move quickly, especially not for a firm that needs an entire building with specific configurations for conference rooms, client meeting spaces, and staff offices. Bradley's partners were reportedly furious with him when they learned the termination was connected to a family dispute, rather than any business failing on their part. There were, I heard, very tense conversations behind closed doors about how a 15-year lease with such favorable terms had also carried such a dangerous clause, and why no one had thought to renegotiate it once the firm grew successful enough that losing the space would actually hurt. They scrambled. They found temporary space in a business center across town, the kind with shared conference rooms and a receptionist who answers for 6 different companies. It was, from what I understand, a significant step down from the polished, ivy-draped building they had occupied for so long, the one with their name in gold letters by the door. I heard that several of their bigger clients raised eyebrows at meetings held in a generic rented conference room instead of the offices they were used to. I heard that it took nearly 8 months for the firm to secure and move into a new permanent location, and that the whole ordeal cost them considerably more than 30 days of inconvenience. It cost them a measure of the polish and prestige they had spent 15 years building. I did not gloat about any of this. I want to be honest with you about that. There is a version of this story where I could have called every person I knew and made sure they understood exactly what had happened and why, but I didn't do that. I simply let the facts unfold on their own the way facts tend to without my help. Catherine did not speak to me for nearly 4 months after the termination notice. That silence was, in its own way, the hardest part of all of this, harder than the humiliation at the party, harder than watching my daughter become someone who could say something so casually cruel to me. There were nights during those 4 months when I questioned whether I had done the right thing, when I wondered if I had traded my dignity for my relationship with my only daughter, and whether that trade had been worth it. But then 5 months after the party, Catherine called me. Not to argue, not to demand anything. She called, and her voice was quieter than I had heard it in years, and she asked if she could come see me. She came alone without Bradley, and she sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with my tea the night of the party, and she cried and she apologized not just for the words she said that night, but for the years of small absences before it, for forgetting somewhere along the way whose daughter she actually was. I won't pretend everything is perfectly healed between us. Relationships don't repair themselves in a single afternoon over tea, no matter how sincere the apology. But Catherine visits now, regularly, and she comes as herself, not as a polished performance for anyone else's benefit. Bradley and I have a careful, cordial relationship, respectful in the way two people are respectful when they've learned exactly what the other is capable of. Sterling v. Cole eventually found a beautiful new building, and I hear it suits them well. I did not rent it to them, in case you were wondering. If there is a lesson in any of this, it is not really about buildings or leases or legal clauses buried in old contracts. It is about the quiet danger of letting people believe your generosity is owed to them rather than given freely, and the importance of remembering, no matter how old you are or how long you've spent putting others first, that you are still allowed to demand to be treated with respect. I spent decades being the kind of woman who gave without asking for anything in return, and I do not regret the giving. But I stopped, on that night in the ballroom, being willing to give to people who had forgotten to be grateful. I am 74 years old. I have buried my husband, built a life from almost nothing, and I have learned later than I would have liked that dignity is not something you should have to fight for from your own family, but when you do have to fight for it, you fight for it fully, calmly, and without apology. If this story meant something to you tonight, I would be so grateful if you'd like this video and subscribe for more stories like mine. And please tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing how far these small pieces of my life have traveled, and how many kitchen tables around the world they've reached. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. I'll see you in the next one.